The Scanian War was a part of the Northern Wars involving the union of Denmark, Norway, Brandenburg and Sweden. It was fought from 1675 to 1679 mainly on Scanian soil, in the former Danish provinces along the border with Sweden and in northern Germany. While the latter battles are regarded as a theatre of the Scanian War in English, Danish and Swedish historiography, they are seen as a separate war in German historiography, called the Swedish Brandenburg War. The war was prompted by Swedish involvement in the Franco-Dutch War. Sweden had allied with France against several European countries. The United Provinces, under attack by France, sought support from Denmark, Norway. After some hesitation, King Christian V started the invasion of Skaland in 1675, while the Swedish were occupied with a war against Brandenburg. The invasion of Scania was combined with a simultaneous Norwegian front called the Jayden Love War, forcing the defending Swedes to fight a two-front war in addition to their entanglements in the Holy Roman Empire. The Danish objective was to retrieve the Scanian lands that had been ceded to Sweden in the Treaty of Roskilde after the Northern Wars. Although the Danish offensive was initially a great success, Swedish counter-offensives led by the 19-year-old Charles XI of Sweden nullified much of the gain. At the end of the war, the Swedish navy had lost at sea. The Danish army had been defeated in Scania by the Swedes, who in turn had been beaten in northern Germany by the Brandenburgers. The war and the hostilities ended when Denmark's ally the United Provinces settled with Sweden's ally France, and the Swedish King Charles XI married Danish Princess Ulrike Eleonora, sister of Christian V. Background: Franco-Swedish alliance. In the 1660s and early 1670s, the Swedish Empire experienced a financial crisis. In hope of subsidies, Charles XI of Sweden had entered the anti-French Triple Alliance with the Dutch Republic and the Kingdom of England, which broke apart when Charles II of England approached France in 1670, after the War of Devolution. In April 1672, Sweden and France concluded an alliance, with France promising 400,000 riksdaler of subsidies in peacetime, to be raised to 600,000 in wartime, for Sweden maintaining a 16,000 men strong army in her German dominions. Also, Sweden maintained good relations to the Dukes of Holstein-Gottorp south of Denmark. By September 1674, Sweden had enlarged her army to 22,000 men after France had increased the subsidies to 900,000 riksdalers, which she threatened to withdraw if Sweden was not using this army, stationed in Swedish Pomerania, for an attack on her adversaries. By December, the Swedish army had grown to 25,000 to 26,000 men, 4,000 to 5,000 of whom stationed in Bremen, 2,000 to 3,000 in Wismar, 6,000 to 7,000 in Pomeranian garrisons, and 13,000 free to operate under Lord High Constable and Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Wrangel. Anti-Franco-Swedish alliance. Another defensive alliance formed in September 1672, between Denmark, Emperor Leopold I, the Electorate of Brandenburg, and the Duchies of Brunswick-Selle, Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel and Hesse-Kassel. This alliance maintained an army of 21,000 foot and 10,500 horse, and since May 1673, an additional 12,000 men and 20 vessels maintained with Dutch subsidies. Brandenburg was then the second most powerful German state, and maintained its own standing army of 23,000 men. The Netherlands had been attacked by the French army in 1672, known as the Rampjaar, and the ensuing Franco-Dutch War would only be concluded by the treaties of Nijmegen in 1678. Soleil Louis XIV intended to weaken the anti-French alliance by engaging them on their eastern frontiers. He supported John Sobieski, candidate for the Polish throne. He also supported a contemporary revolt of nobles in Hungary, and aimed at binding the Brandenburgian army in a war with Sweden. War on land. In northern Germany, Swedish Brandenburg War. In December 1674, Louis XIV of France called upon Sweden to invade Brandenburg. Wrangel advanced into the Uckermark, a region on the Brandenburg-Pomeranian frontier, securing quarters for his forces until the weather would permit him to turn westwards to Hanover. Frederick William I, Elector of Brandenburg, received the news in the Rhine Valley, and turned northeast to confront Wrangel. On the 18th of June or the 28th of June the armies met in the Battle of Fehrbellin. The Fehrbellin affair was a mere skirmish, with actual casualties amounting to fewer than 600 men, but it was a defeat by a numerically inferior force from a territory Sweden had little regard for. As a result of this defeat, Sweden appeared vulnerable, encouraging neighboring countries that had suffered invasion by Sweden in the prior Swedish campaigns to join in the Scanian War. Wrangel retreated to Swedish Femen. When the United Provinces initially asked for Danish support against the French and their allies in the Franco-Dutch War, Danish-Norwegian King Christian V wanted to join them, and go to war with Sweden immediately to recapture the historically Danish provinces of Scania and Halland. Count Peder Griffenfeld, an influential royal advisor, advised against it, and instead advocated a more pro-France policy. But where the numerically superior Swedes lost the Battle of Fehrbellin on June 28, 1675. It was the first such defeat of Swedish forces since the 30 Years' War. Christian V saw his chance, and overcoming Griffenfeld's opposition, attacked. Allied campaign against Bremen-Verden, the second largest Swedish garrison in North Germany, after Swedish Pomerania, was the twin duchy of Bremen-Verden. For political reasons, and to prevent the Swedes from advertising and recruiting mercenaries, the Allies decided to conquer these two duchies. Denmark and Brandenburg-Prussia were joined by allies from the neighbouring imperial principalities of Munster and the Duchy of Brunswick-Luneburg. The campaign began on 15 September 1675 with an Allied advance into the two Swedish duchies. They rapidly captured one Swedish fortress after another. The Swedes were hampered by the high number of mainly German deserters because, after the imposition of the imperial ban, it was forbidden to take up arms against member states of the Holy Roman Empire. By the end of the year, only the Swedish headquarters town of Stage and Carlsberg were still in Swedish hands. In November the Allies sent their troops into winter quarters, with the result that the conquest of the last remaining Swedish strongholds had to wait until the following year. Stade did not surrender until 13 August 1676. This theatre of war was nevertheless only of secondary importance for the Allies and for Sweden. Swedish Pomerania. At this point, the Swedish Empire in Germany began to crumble. In 1675, most of Swedish Pomerania and the Duchy of Bremen were taken by the Brandenburgers, Austrians, and Danes. In December 1677, the Elector of Brandenburg captured Stettin. Stralsund fell on October 11, 1678. Greifswald, Sweden's last possession on the continent, was lost on November 5. A defensive alliance with John III of Poland was rendered inoperative on August 4, 1677 by the annihilation of Sweden's sea power. The Battle of Öland, June 17, 1676, Battle of Femen, June 1677, and the difficulties of the Polish king. Danish recapture of Scania. The Danish recapture of Scania started with the seizure of Helsingborg on June 29, 1676. Danish King Christian V brought 15,000 troops against a defending Swedish army of 5,000 men, who spread out over the province. Initially the operation was a great success. Large parts of the local peasantry sided with Denmark, and the outnumbered Swedish troops were in bad shape. Town after town fell into the hands of the Danes, and the Swedes had to retreat north to Sweden proper. In a month's time, only the fortified town of Malmö remained under Swedish control. The Jayden Love War. Norwegian history records the campaigns in Norway as the Jayden Love War. It was named after Governor-General Ulrik Fredrik Jayden Love, who as commander-in-chief directed the Norwegian offensive. The Norwegian offensives were generally successful, but served only to offset the Danish setbacks elsewhere. The 1675 stalemate simultaneously with the Danish invasion. Norway's forces were marshalled along the border to force the Swedes to deal with the prospect of fighting a two-front war. A force of 4,000 Norwegians was concentrated at Fredrikshald under the command of General Rosenstein, both protecting against any Swedish attempts to invade and threatening to retake the formerly Norwegian province of Bohusln. The Swedish General Ascherberg took position at Svartborg with 2,000 men. Operations along the Norwegian-Swedish border during 1675 were largely skirmishes to test strength, as mountain passes were well guarded. Jayden Love then directed 1,000 men in galleys to proceed down the coast and cut off Ascherberg's supply route, as Ascherberg had intelligence of the effort. It was unsuccessful. Both armies went into winter quarters in the border districts. Jayden Love's 1676 campaign. In 1676, Jayden Love personally led Norwegian forces in the field. His Norwegian army took and fortified the pass at Kvistrom and proceeded south, seizing Uddevalla with minimal opposition. Swedish forces provided significantly more resistance to the attack on Vänersborg, but Jayden Love's forces captured it. From there his forces moved to Bohus, where they were supplemented by General Thun Huitfeldt's army of 5,000 men. In early August a Danish expedition was sent north to take the town of Halmstad and then advance along the Swedish west coast to seek contact with General Jayden Love's forces. This led to the Battle of Fillebro, where Charles XI of Sweden won a decisive victory over the Danish mercenary force led by a Scotsman, General Duncan, effectively preventing the linking of forces. The Swedes then retreated north to gather more troops. Christian V brought his army to Halmstad and besieged the town for a couple of weeks but gave up and returned to winter quarters in Scania. The recapture of Bohusln. Despite the Danish forces' defeat at Fillebro, the successful recapture of Scania allowed Norwegian troops to regain formerly Norwegian Bohusln. During the winter of 1677, the Norwegian army was increased to 17,000 men, allowing operations to increase further. Jayden Love captured the fortress at Marstrand in July and joined forces with General Löwenhielm. The Swedes mounted a counter-offensive under the command of Magnus Gabriel de la Gardie, sending an army of 8,000 to expel the Norwegian forces. They were defeated by the Norwegians, and forced to retreat, holding only Bohus fortress in Bohusln. The recapture of Jmtland. In August 1677, Norwegian forces of 2,000 men, led by General Reinhold von Hoven and General Christian Schultz, also retook formerly Norwegian Jmtland. Although Bohusln and Jmtland were former Norwegian provinces and the forces in both locations were well received by the native populations there, things went badly for Denmark, Norway in the Scanian campaigns, and the Norwegian forces withdrew when ordered to do so by King Christian V. The war in Scania. On October 24, 1676, the Swedish King Charles XI marched back into Scania with an army of 12,000, forcing the Danes in the defensive. After a number of skirmishes, the Danish army was badly beaten in the Battle of Lund on December 4. Despite gains by Jayden Love in the north, the Swedish offensive of Charles XI tipped the scale. After failing to take Malmö and the defeat of the Battle of Landskrona, the Danish army in Scania was still not beaten, but the morale was definitely broken. However, the Danes held the fortified town of Landskrona and was able to ship in more Dutch and German mercenaries, and in July 1678, Christian V marched east to rescue the diminishing Danish garrison in the town of Kristianstad, besieged by the Swedes. After facing the whole Swedish army on the plain west of Kristianstad, Christian V opted not to give battle but to retreat back to Landskrona and evacuate all his troops from Scania. War at sea. Battle of Öland. The war was also fought at sea. In the Battle of Öland, June 1, 1676, the Danish and Dutch fleet won a great victory over the Swedes, sinking one of the largest naval vessels at that time, Kronen. With the victory they got control of the Baltic Sea. Battle of Femen. The Danes won another significant victory in the Battle of Femen on the 31st of May 1677. The battle was located between Femen and Warnemünde, north of modern-day Germany. The Danes had been blockading a Swedish squadron in Göteborg, and each side had been sending fleets out regularly in the hope of a decisive victory at sea. The Swedish ships, under Erik Karlsson Jobblad, left to return to the Baltic Sea and there met a larger Danish squadron under Admiral Niels Duell. The action started in the evening of the 31st and continued until the next morning. It was an almost complete Danish victory. Several Swedish ships were captured, most as they tried to flee, and one was run aground and burned. Battle of Kodja Bay. The control at sea was secured a year later, when the Danish fleet, led by Niels Duell, again defeated the Swedish fleet at the Battle of Kodja Bay, near Copenhagen. The Swedes lost over 3,000 men in this engagement, while the Danish only suffered some 375 casualties. The Danish success at sea hindered the Swedish ability to move troops between northern Germany and Sweden. Peace was negotiated between France and Denmark at the Treaty of Fontainebleau on August 23, 1679. The peace, which was largely dictated by France, stipulated that all territory lost by Sweden during the war should be returned. Thus, the terms formulated at the Treaty of Copenhagen remained in force. It was reaffirmed by the Treaty of Lund, signed by Denmark, Norway and Sweden themselves. Denmark received minor war reparations from Sweden and returned Swedish Rügen. Likewise, the electorate of Brandenburg had to return her gains, Bremen, Verden and Swedish Pomerania, to Sweden on behalf of France in the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye. On the ground in Scania itself, however, the war had a devastating effect in raising the hopes of the pro-Danish guerrilla known as Snaffane, who thereupon suffered savage repression from the reinstated Swedish authorities.